The sound of massive wings beating against the thin atmosphere of Station Prometheus made Chief Engineer Marcus Chen look up from his workbench. Through the grimy viewport of his repair bay, he watched something impossible descend toward the docking platform. A dragon. An actual, honest-to-God dragon. But not like anything from the old Earth legends. This creature was enormous, easily the size of a cargo hauler, with scales that should have been pearl white, but were instead covered in what looked like millions of dark, crusty growths. Barnacles, Marcus realized with a start. Space barnacles, the kind that attached themselves to ships that spent too long in the void between systems. But he'd never seen them on a living creature before. The dragon landed with surprising grace despite its obvious illness, and Marcus could see a smaller figure riding on its back. As the dust settled, he made out the rider, humanoid but definitely not human. She had the elongated limbs and silver-tinged skin of a Zephyrian, one of the more peaceful species in this sector of the galaxy. Marcus wiped his hands on his coveralls and stepped outside. The Zephyrian woman slid down from the dragon's neck, her movements quick and desperate. Up close, Marcus could see tears streaming down her face, leaving silver tracks on her cheeks. "Please," she said in accented but clear standard, "you must help her. They said humans can fix anything. They said you understand machines and living things in ways others cannot." Marcus approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. The dragon's head turned toward him, and he found himself looking into eyes that held an ancient intelligence. Despite the barnacles covering most of her body, he could see she was magnificent. Her breath came in labored gasps, and some of the barnacles had grown so large they were interfering with the movement of her wings. "I'm Kira," the Zephyrian woman continued, "and this is my mother, Thessera. She's been sick for months, getting worse every day. The best healers on 5 worlds have tried to help her, but none understand what's happening." Marcus circled the dragon slowly, his engineer's mind already working. The barnacles weren't just attached to the surface. Some had grown so deep they seemed to be interfering with the dragon's natural bioelectrical systems. Dragons were essentially living spacecraft, their bodies adapted for interstellar travel, with organs that could process cosmic radiation and convert stellar energy into usable power. "How long has she been in space?" Marcus asked, running his scanner over a cluster of particularly large barnacles. "Nearly 200 years, Kira replied. "She's been traveling between worlds, carrying messages and refugees, never staying planetside long enough to—" She trailed off as understanding dawned in her eyes. "Long enough to shed her old scales naturally," Marcus finished. "Dragons are supposed to undergo a molting process every 50 years or so when they're in a planet's gravity well. These barnacles have prevented that natural process." Thessera made a sound that was part whimper, part growl. Marcus could see the pain in her ancient eyes. "The healers on other worlds," Marcus continued. "They tried to remove the barnacles directly, didn't they?" Kira nodded miserably. "They pulled some off, but it only made things worse. She screamed, and the wounds wouldn't heal properly. Because they were treating her like a ship instead of understanding what she really is," Marcus said, his mind racing through possibilities. "She's not just a biological creature, and she's not just a machine. She's both, integrated in ways that most species can't comprehend." He turned to face Kira directly. "I think I can help her, but it's going to be complicated. The barnacles have grown into her bioelectrical matrix. Remove them wrong, and we could shut down her higher brain functions permanently, but leave them, and they'll eventually kill her." "What do you need?" Kira asked immediately. "Time and access to some very specific equipment. I'll need to map her entire bioelectrical system, understand how the barnacles are interfering with her natural processes, and then design a way to safely remove them while helping her body remember how to molt properly." Thessera lifted her great head and looked directly at Marcus. When she spoke, her voice was like the rumble of a distant storm, speaking in the old dragon tongue that few beings in the galaxy still understood. But somehow, Marcus found he could grasp the meaning. "She says," Kira translated unnecessarily, "that she's heard humans have a saying, 'If you can't fix it with a hammer, you're not using a big enough hammer.'" A sound that might have been laughter escaped the dragon's throat. "But she hopes you'll try a gentler approach first." Marcus grinned, despite the seriousness of the situation. "Tell her I've got a few tricks that don't involve hammers, but first, let's get her into the main bay where I can do a proper examination." As they began the careful process of moving Thesara into the repair facility, Marcus's mind was already working on the problem. He'd need to combine his knowledge of biomechanical systems with xenobiology, and probably invent a few new techniques along the way. It was exactly the kind of impossible challenge that made him glad to be human, and exactly the kind of problem that other species brought to humanity when their own experts had given up. The dragon settled onto the reinforced platform in his workshop, her massive form dwarfing even his largest equipment. Barnacles covered her from nose to tail tip, some so large they had formed their own grotesque ecosystems. But beneath it all, Marcus could sense the incredible life force that had carried this magnificent being across the stars for 2 centuries. "Don't worry, Thesara," he said softly, beginning to set up his most sensitive bioscanners. "We're going to figure this out. Humans might not be the oldest species in the galaxy or the most advanced, but we've got one thing going for us. We're really, really good at fixing things that everyone else has given up on." The dragon's eyes tracked his movements as he worked, and Marcus could swear he saw hope flickering in those ancient depths. This was going to be the challenge of his career, but looking at Kira's desperate face and Thesara's patient suffering, he knew he'd move heaven and earth to save them both. The first step would be understanding exactly what they were dealing with. Marcus powered up his quantum bioscanner and began the long process of mapping every bioelectrical pathway in the dragon's incredibly complex nervous system. What he discovered in those first few hours would change everything he thought he knew about the relationship between organic life and mechanical systems. As the station's artificial night cycle began, Marcus was still working, Kira dozing fitfully beside her mother's great head, and Thesara watching with tired but hopeful eyes. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time in months, the ancient dragon allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she would fly free among the stars once more. 3 days into the diagnosis, Marcus had barely slept. His workshop looked like a madman's laboratory, with holographic displays showing 3-dimensional maps of Thesara's bioelectrical system floating in midair. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting his scanners to the dragon's massive form, and his computer systems hummed constantly as they processed terabytes of biological data. Kira had taken to bringing him meals, which he ate absently while staring at readouts that would have baffled the galaxy's top xenobiologists. The young Zephyrian woman watched him work with a mixture of hope and growing anxiety as the complexity of her mother's condition became clear. "It's worse than I thought," Marcus admitted on the 4th morning, rubbing his tired eyes. "But also more fascinating than anything I've ever encountered." He gestured to the largest holographic display, which showed Thesara's nervous system in glowing blue lines. "Your mother isn't just a dragon who travels in space. Over the centuries, she's actually evolved into something unique. Her nervous system has adapted to interface directly with quantum field fluctuations. That's how she navigates between stars without instruments." Thesara raised her great head, listening intently as Kira translated. "The barnacles aren't just growing on her," Marcus continued, his excitement building despite his exhaustion. "They're quantum-sensitive parasites. They're feeding off the same energy fields she uses for navigation, and they've integrated themselves so deeply into her bioelectrical matrix that removing them conventionally would be like trying to perform brain surgery with a plasma torch. Kira's face went pale. Then there's nothing you can do? Marcus turned to look directly at the dragon, whose ancient eyes seemed to be studying him with an intelligence that transcended species barriers. I didn't say that, but we're going to have to try something that's never been attempted before. We need to essentially reboot her entire bioelectrical system while simultaneously convincing her body to remember its natural molting process. He moved to another display showing molecular scans of the barnacles themselves. These parasites have one weakness. They can't survive rapid shifts in quantum field polarity. If I can create a controlled field fluctuation that matches the frequency of Thessera's natural bioelectrical patterns, we can disrupt the barnacles without damaging her nervous system. And the molting? Kira asked. That's where human engineering comes in, Marcus said with a grin that looked slightly manic from lack of sleep. Dragons molt when their bodies are flooded with specific hormones triggered by planetary gravity wells and electromagnetic fields. Since Thessera has been in space for 2 centuries, her endocrine system has essentially forgotten how to molt. He pulled up another display showing chemical formulations. I'm going to have to synthesize those hormones artificially and deliver them at precisely the right moment during the quantum field treatment. Too early, and her new scales will grow over the barnacles. Too late, and the shock of the field fluctuations could kill her. Thessera made a sound that was almost like a chuckle, and when she spoke in her ancient language, Kira couldn't help but smile through her worry. She says humans are either very brave or very stupid to attempt something like this, Kira translated. Both, usually, Marcus replied. But that's what makes us good at fixing impossible problems. Over the next 2 days, Marcus worked like a man possessed. He cannibalized equipment from throughout the station, building devices that combined human engineering with adaptations for dragon physiology. His quantum field generator looked like it had been assembled by a particularly creative madman, incorporating everything from cargo hauler power couplings to delicate biomedical sensors. The hormone synthesizer was even more improvised, requiring Marcus to essentially reverse-engineer dragon endocrinology from first principles. He worked from genetic samples Thessera provided, analyzing her cellular structure and comparing it to data from the few dragon specimens in the Galactic Biological Archives. The timing has to be perfect, he explained to Kira as he made final calibrations. I'll start with low-level quantum pulses to begin disrupting the barnacle's grip. As they weaken, I'll gradually increase the field strength while simultaneously triggering the hormone cascade. If everything works perfectly, her body should begin the molting process just as the barnacles lose their hold on her bioelectrical system. And if it doesn't work perfectly? Kira asked quietly. Marcus paused in his calibrations. Then we'll probably kill her, but Kira, she's dying anyway. The barnacles are spreading into her central nervous system. She has maybe a few weeks left before they cause irreversible brain damage. Thessera had been listening to their conversation, and now she spoke directly to Marcus in her rumbling voice. He found, to his surprise, that he was beginning to understand the dragon language without translation. She says she's ready, he told Kira. She'd rather die trying to be free than waste away as a prisoner in her own body. The procedure began at station midnight, when electromagnetic interference from the local star was at its minimum. Marcus had positioned Thessera at the center of his improvised quantum field array, with biomonitoring sensors tracking every aspect of her physiology. Starting with minimal field strength, Marcus announced, his hands moving over controls he'd essentially invented over the past week. Thessera, you're going to feel a tingling sensation as the quantum fields interact with your nervous system. The dragon's eyes closed as the first pulse hit her. The barnacles across her body began to shift slightly, their grip on her scales loosening microscopically. Good response, Marcus muttered, watching his readouts. beginning hormone introduction sequence. He triggered the synthesized endocrine cocktail, watching as Thessara's body chemistry began to shift toward a molting state for the first time in 2 centuries. Her breathing deepened, and she made soft, rumbling sounds that spoke of relief rather than pain. "Increasing field strength to level 3, Marcus announced. "This is where it gets tricky." The quantum pulse intensified, and suddenly barnacles began falling from Thessara's body like grotesque rain. But instead of the bleeding wounds that previous attempts had caused, her scales beneath appeared healthy and strong. "It's working," Kira whispered, tears streaming down her face as she watched patches of her mother's true pearl-white scales emerge from beneath the parasite coating. Marcus increased the field strength again, and Thessara's entire body began to shudder. For a terrifying moment, her bioelectrical readings spiked dangerously, but then they stabilized at levels Marcus had never seen before. "Level 5, he called out, pushing his improvised equipment to its limits. "Maximum field strength." The quantum pulse filled the entire workshop with a sound like singing crystal. Barnacles exploded away from Thessara's body in massive chunks, and underneath, her scales were beginning to loosen in the natural molting pattern that should have occurred decades ago. Then something unexpected happened. As Thessara's body remembered its ancient rhythms, she began to glow. Soft, bioluminescent patterns raced along her newly revealed scales, and Marcus realized he was witnessing something that few beings in the galaxy had ever seen. A dragon's true form, freed from the parasites that had hidden her magnificence for so long. The process continued for nearly an hour, with Marcus making constant adjustments to keep the quantum field in perfect harmony with Thessara's changing bioelectrical patterns. When it was finally over, the dragon that emerged was transformed. Gone were the millions of barnacles that had turned her into a grotesque parody of her species. Her scales shone like pearls in the workshop lighting, and the bioluminescent patterns that played across her hide spoke of power and freedom that had been locked away for 2 centuries. Thessara raised her head and spoke, her voice stronger than it had been since their arrival. When she spread her wings for the first time in months, they extended to their full, magnificent span without pain or restriction. "She says thank you," Kira translated, though her words were barely necessary. The gratitude in the ancient dragon's eyes was unmistakable. But Marcus was already looking at his readings, and what he saw there made him smile with satisfaction and wonder. "Kira," he said softly, "I think we've done more than just save your mother's life. Look at these bioelectrical readings." The displays showed energy patterns that were off the charts compared to what they'd recorded before treatment. Thessara wasn't just healthy. She was stronger than she'd been in centuries. "The molting process didn't just remove old scales," Marcus explained. "It reset her entire bioelectrical system to optimal levels. She's essentially been given a new lease on life." As if to prove his point, Thessara stood and walked to the workshop's largest viewport. Outside, the stars beckoned, and for the first time in months, she felt the familiar urge to take wing and soar among them. The impossible had been accomplished. Human ingenuity, combined with the courage to attempt what others deemed impossible, had saved a life and restored a legend to the cosmos. 6 months after Thessara's miraculous recovery, Station Prometheus had become something of a pilgrimage site. Word of the human engineer who had saved an ancient dragon spread throughout the galaxy's communication networks, and beings from dozens of species arrived seeking Marcus Chen's help with problems their own experts had declared unsolvable. Marcus found himself treating everything from quantum-corrupted AI matrices to biomechanical symbiotes gone wrong. Each case taught him something new about the intersection of organic life and technology, and his workshop had evolved into a bizarre fusion of medical bay, engineering station, and research laboratory. But today was special. Today, the Sarah was returning from her first long-distance flight since her recovery, and she wasn't coming alone. Kira stood beside Marcus on the observation deck, watching the viewport with barely contained excitement. "Do you see them yet?" she asked for the dozenth time. "Patience," Marcus replied with a smile. "Your mother said she'd be here before the station's noon cycle, and ancient dragons have an excellent sense of timing." As if summoned by his words, shapes began to appear against the star field. First one, then another, then more, until Marcus counted 7 dragons approaching the station in a perfect V formation. Thesara led them, her pearl-white scales gleaming in the light of the local sun, the bioluminescent patterns on her hide pulsing in complex rhythms that Marcus had learned were part of dragon communication. Behind her flew dragons of every color imaginable, deep space black with silver highlights, golden yellow like captured starlight, deep red that seemed to hold the warmth of a planetary core, and others whose scale patterns defied easy description. "The Dragon Council," Kira whispered in awe. "Mother said she was going to speak with them, but I never imagined they would all come here." As the dragons settled onto the station's expanded landing platform, Marcus had been forced to add additional docking space to accommodate his growing reputation. Beings throughout Prometheus gathered at viewports to witness something that hadn't been seen in living memory, a full gathering of the galaxy's dragon elders. Thesara approached the observation deck where Marcus and Kira waited, her movements graceful and powerful in ways they hadn't been for decades. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of centuries spent traversing the void between stars. "Marcus Chen," she said in perfect standard, another change since her recovery. "The Council has asked me to extend an invitation that has never before been offered to a non-dragon." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of invitation?" A massive dragon, the color of deep space, moved forward. This was Valtharion, Marcus realized, the eldest of the dragon kind, whose existence was more legend than fact to most of the galaxy's inhabitants. "Human engineer," Valtharion rumbled, his voice like the echo of dying stars. "What you accomplished here defied the understanding of healers across 100 worlds. But more than that, your methods have implications that reach far beyond a single case." He gestured with one enormous claw toward displays that Marcus hadn't noticed being set up on the platform. They showed medical scans, genetic analyses, and bioelectrical readouts from dozens of dragons. "For millennia," Valtharion continued, "our kind has suffered from the same condition that nearly killed Thesara. We believed it was the inevitable price of our role as travelers between worlds. But your work has shown us that what we thought was natural aging was actually a preventable medical condition." Marcus felt the weight of dozens of ancient eyes upon him. "You're saying that other dragons are dying unnecessarily," finished a golden dragon whose scales seemed to capture and reflect light in impossible ways. "We are Kirthania, keeper of the star maps. In our archives, we have records of over 300 dragons who have died from what your people might call quantum barnacle syndrome in the past 1,000 years alone. But that's just the ones we know about," added a red dragon whose presence seemed to warm the air around her. "There may be dozens of our kind scattered across the galaxy, suffering alone because they believe nothing can be done to help them." Marcus looked from dragon to dragon, understanding slowly dawning. "You want me to teach others how to perform the procedure?" "More than that," Thesara said, moving closer to the observation deck. "We want to offer you something that has never been given to a member of another species. We want to make you an honorary member of the Dragon Council, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." Kira gasped beside him. Even she, who had grown up among dragons, understood the magnitude of what was being offered. "I'm honored," Marcus said carefully, "but I'm not sure I understand what that would mean." Valtharian's ancient eyes seemed to twinkle with something that might have been amusement. It would mean access to our star charts, our ancient knowledge, our hidden refugees scattered across the galaxy. It would mean the right to call upon any dragon for aid in your work. And in return, it would mean accepting the responsibility to help our kind whenever the need arises. There's more, Thasara added. We've been talking among ourselves, and we've realized that your approach to biomechanical integration could revolutionize how we understand the relationship between organic life and technology. We want to establish a new kind of research center here on your station, where dragons and humans can work together to push the boundaries of what's possible. Marcus felt his engineer's heart racing at the possibilities. Access to dragon bioelectrical systems, their quantum navigation abilities, their centuries of accumulated knowledge about life in the deep void. It would be like being given the keys to the universe. But understand, rumbled another dragon, this one with scales that seemed to shift between colors like an oil slick. This is not just about medicine. Dragons have always been the galaxy's messengers, carrying information and refugees between worlds. If we can extend our operational lifespans, if we can help our kind recover from the damage of centuries in space, we can better serve the galaxy's needs. And, added Carthania, there are threats coming. Our deep space scouts have detected signs of something moving in the void between galaxies, something that has consumed entire star systems in distant regions. If we're going to face what's coming, we need to be at full strength. Marcus looked at Kira, who was staring at him with an expression of amazement and pride. Then he looked back at the assembled dragons, each one a living legend, each one offering him a chance to make a difference on a galactic scale. I accept, he said simply. But I have one condition. The dragons waited. I want to train others, not just humans, but members of any species with the aptitude and the desire to help. This knowledge shouldn't be limited to one person or even one species. The galaxy is big, and there are probably cases out there right now that we could save if we acted quickly enough. Valtharian made a sound that might have been approval. Spoken like a true engineer. Very well, Marcus Chen of Earth. By the ancient compact of star and void, by the bonds that tie all life together, we name you Friend of Dragons and member of our council. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Each dragon contributed something to a ritual that was older than most civilizations. Valtharian's blessing of wisdom, Carthania's gift of navigation knowledge, Thasara's bond of trust and friendship, and on through each member of the council until Marcus felt as though he carried a piece of each ancient soul within him. When it was over, he found himself holding a scale from each dragon, scales that would serve as both identification and communication devices, allowing him to call upon the council whenever the need arose. So, what happens now? He asked Thasara as the other dragons prepared to depart. Now, she replied, we change the galaxy. Your station becomes our medical and research center. We begin training the next generation of biomechanical engineers, and we prepare for whatever's coming from the deep void. She paused, her ancient eyes looking toward the stars. But first, there's a red dragon named Pyraxis in the Centauri sector who's been suffering from severe quantum corruption for the past 30 years. He's convinced he's going to die alone, and he's too proud to ask for help. Marcus grinned and began mentally cataloging the equipment he'd need. Well then, I guess we'd better pack our bags. Can't have dragons suffering when there's something we can do about it. As Thasara spread her magnificent wings in preparation for another journey among the stars, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that desperate day when a sick dragon had landed on his station. He'd thought he was just fixing a medical problem, but instead he'd found himself at the center of a galactic community that spanned species and centuries. Looking out at the stars, Marcus felt the weight of his new responsibilities and the excitement of infinite possibilities. Somewhere out there, dragons were suffering from problems that others had declared impossible to solve. But humans had always excelled at doing the impossible, and now they had the support of the galaxy's most ancient and wise species. The future was going to be very interesting indeed.